Good afternoon. I want to thank Press Club and CWeb for inviting me here this afternoon. I've got a few comments I'd like to make, and I'd like to preface what I'm going to say with a sort of headliner, and just the theme of which is the challenges facing the Gulf Coast reflect a national inability to come to grips with the need to sustain America's energy coast. And what I want to do in the next comments is sort of build upon a larger perspective of what is happening other than just the oil gusher that most of you are, or all of you, are familiar with. While the nation watches this historical tragedy of oil invading the Louisiana coast, it's very important that everyone keep in mind that this coast has been under siege for 4 decades. It will not be possible to protect, restore, and recover this coastal Louisiana region of this devastating oil tragedy without significant ways in which federal and state governments deal with natural resources that are now essentially isolated because of conflicting state and federal policies to deal with multi-purpose uses of things like the Mississippi River and its delta. Sediments from the Mississippi River, and one of the pictures that you have in your pamphlet that shows how the river disperses the sediment out across the coast. And I know we're talking about oceans here today, but I want to make a clear connection between the land, the river, a delta, and its ocean. Those sediments that you see in those pictures are being artificially constrained and are emptying out into the Gulf of Mexico, past New Orleans, at 1/2 of its historical load. Half of that sediment is now being trapped in places like the Missouri River before it even gets down to the Mississippi coast, Louisiana Mississippi coast, to build the delta. The other half that actually does pass New Orleans each day passes right out into the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico and bypasses its delta. Without these sediments to sustain this geologic framework, this deltaic coast, a coast built by its river over the last 6,000 years, the shoreline barriers that represent the first line of defense, the capability of this system to adapt and recover from this oil gusher will not occur. It's urgent that this nation must ask now how we manage the deltaic coast to sustain 1/4 of our domestic energy supply with the additional risk of rising seas and climate change, and how we maintain not only the purpose of this river for navigation and flood control, which is of national interest, but at the same time we cover what is actually, we're understanding now, the true risk of energy exportation in this region of the nation. After Katrina, all we talked about, well, before Katrina, we actually talked quite a bit of just the restoration of this region. After Katrina, we talked about restoration and protection because of what we saw, the devastating effect of the hurricane on New Orleans. Now we're going to be challenged to find ways to build a sustainable delta that can also not only provide restoration and protection, but also reduce our risk to oil pollution as we continue oil and gas activities on the outer continental shelf. Dealing with this catastrophe is very different than dealing with hurricanes. Once a hurricane passes and the storm surge and winds recede, you know exactly what you're dealing with as far as recovery, and you know what process needs to be instituted to bring back some normal lifestyle. We do not know the final magnitude of this oil gusher. It's all speculation as to the total impacts that we're going to be dealing with. The decisions that are being made will continue to unfold, and the trade-offs that we will be dealing with in recovery of this deltaic coast will be very significant impacts on how we look relative to a sustainable delta in the future. And it's because of the environmental complexities that Dr. Shirley just referred to is very critical to understand what we're dealing with as far as recovery. The key thing to remember is that this oil is moving inland into a coast as a river moves out into the Gulf of Mexico. And all of this is happening in an environment that has been degrading over the last 4 decades. In the last 100 years, we've lost 2,300 square miles of wetlands. We've lost a large part of our barrier islands. The predominance of this area is one of the is important of national significance to fisheries, and it is truly one of the more sensitive areas of the country related to potential impact of oil. The effect of this oil in our wetland environments will not so much be associated with this fact that it's a toxic matter, but the impact will be more of the fact that it will suffocate, as has been referred to earlier, the suffocating effects of this oil on our ecosystems. And the key here to keep in mind related to our recovery and what we're dealing with is the fact that, as already been alluded to, that this habitats, this region, is home to a large diversity of both marine organisms as well as birds and migratory waterfowl that travel in from large distant areas of the nation and also from South America. And as we work on the recovery and response of this wetland environment related to this contamination, we have to keep in mind that it is these homes that we have to keep intact so that future generations of organisms can come back and reside in this region.